Probably thought I was going to start the first five today, the show today, talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I actually have so much to say about that instance, about her passing and her place in American history. I'm putting that off until a little bit later. I want to tell you in this first five today a story about a man, an American citizen named Jake Gardner, a man who served in the military, who happened to support President Trump. He lived in Omaha, Nebraska, and he owned a bar. As the Black Lives Matter violence and Antifa violence continued to escalate around this country, there was an incident in front of his bar in Omaha, and it involved protesters, Black Lives Matter and Antifa protesters, engaging in violence, smashing windows. It was one of the, not a protest in any meaningful way, the way it's supposed to be protests in America under the First Amendment, but just mob violence ongoing. This man who owned the bar, Jake Gardner, his dad, so this man was, I think he was in his 30s or so, his dad was standing outside as this mob was roving through, these property destroyers, arsonists, mobsters, going through the neighborhood, and the dad was trying to say, get out of here, get away from this bar, basically trying to protect his son's property. Some of the protesters pushed him around a little bit, pushed the dad, who's obviously more senior than the adult son, is in his 30s, pushing him around. The son came out, who was again, Jake Gardner, who was a military veteran. He had a gun, and he said basically, get lost, stop, who pushed my dad, get out of here, tries to push them away. And as the scene becomes more violent, he fired 2 shots in the air, not to hit anybody, just warning shots, get away. And in response to that, one of the Black Lives Matter protesters leaped on Jake Gardner and was on the ground on his back and was beating him. And Jake Gardner managed to get a hold of the gun, his own gun, and used that gun and shot and killed the person who was beating him. That incident largely captured on camera. And so the district attorney in Omaha looked into the case and just said, it was self-defense. This guy's being beaten by one of these mobsters. I want to stop calling these people protesters. They're mobsters. They're criminals. They're engaging in violent attacks on innocent Americans and on property. So anyway, this guy ends up shooting the person who was beating him, very similar to the Trayvon Martin case, and the prosecutor looked into it and concluded that self-defense, it was obviously a killing in self-defense, wasn't going to bring charges. However, because of the relentlessness of the Black Lives Matter Antifa radical left in this country and pressure on the prosecutor, he said, okay, well, I looked into it, here's what I think, but I'll agree. The case can be reviewed by an independent prosecutor if somebody else look into it. And the independent prosecutor happened to be black. And so he looks into the same case, same set of facts, and concludes that charges should be brought against Jake Gardner, that he should be charged with, it was assault and a series of serious felony charges against this bar owner in Omaha. Well, between the time the incident happened, which was the end of May, and just this past weekend, Jake Gardner, because of threats and violence and fear for his own safety, left Omaha, went up to the Northeast, I think it was either Oregon or Washington State, basically trying to stay away, basically just not wanting to be around where he's afraid of violence and people coming after him. So he gets away, goes up to the Northeast to get away from this incident and all of the mobster violence ongoing and criticism of him. And then this new new prosecutor looks into the case, takes it to a grand jury, gets an indictment. So he had agreed to come back to Omaha and face charges for this incident. Instead, what he chose to do, Jake Gardner took his own life this past weekend. It appears actually no other, it wasn't foul play, just took his own life. And I want to tell that story in today's First Five to plant the seed for something I want you to consider as we're moving forward, not just today, but in this whole fall election cycle. We are watching, for example, in Portland, we're now over 100 days straight of violent mob rule in that city. Over 100 days straight, we're looking at destruction of property, burning of flag. Not just, we're not talking about, a rowdy but lawful protests. You can have a protest in a park or some other place where you get permission to have a protest, and you can have a protest for a long time. You can camp out for the summer and have protests, or for the winter. You can have long protests that are loud. You can be loud and chanting and issuing demands. These all fall under the protection of the First Amendment. What we're talking about in this country, Portland being a prime example, but other cities also, is way beyond what the First Amendment protects. We're talking about property destruction. We're talking about murder in the case of numerous police officers and civilians who've lost their lives at the hands of Black Lives Matter and Antifa. And we're talking again about two organizations that are both backed by very radical anti-American Marxist ideas. Antifa and Black Lives Matter are not peaceful, pro-America. We love America. We want to stand with the goodness of America. We just want to make some policy changes. These are people fundamentally opposed to the very idea of freedom in America, fundamentally opposed to the very structure, the construct of America. These groups have been engaged in violent protests, murders, property destruction, breaking windows on businesses, stealing property, burning cars. And this is not because of the horrific incident involving George Floyd in Minneapolis. This is not what this is about. This is long gone out of their memory. It was never really the reason they got started. They got started because there has been a Marxist element in this country waiting for the proper time to leap forward and come to the surface and say, now's our time. We're going to push for a Marxist overthrow of this country. That is what is happening. So back to our friend Jake Gardner in Omaha. I don't know him. I don't know whether he could have done something less than fire his gun at the person who was beating him. I don't know that. And maybe the evidence will uncover that he had some slightly less violent or less lethal way to defend himself. But I do know that this cannot be the kind of standard, the kind of violence we have in our country that we've come to tolerate and treat as a norm. Oh, sure, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, they come into cities. The entire downtown of cities is destroyed. The entire, neighborhoods, businesses that people work their whole lives to develop, homes destroyed. And mostly in these Democrat-run cities, the police stand by. They just stand on the edge. I'm not saying the police don't want to get involved. I'm saying the Democrat leaders of those cities and states will not allow the police to maintain order. So Jake Gardner, in the midst of a protest in Omaha, a violent, riotous mob attacking his bar, his street, his city, defended himself and would have been facing criminal charges for doing that. And just ask yourself, if you're Jake Gardner's family, where is your justice? Where were the police who should have never allowed such an incredible, violent mob to continue acting that way, to continue attacking property? The way those incidents are supposed to be resolved is because store owners, business owners, homeowners call the police. They would say, hey, we have a bunch of thugs outside our business or inside our business and they're destroying it, and the police show up. But what is it we're supposed to do when the police don't come? And in many cities, when the police won't come. That's going to be the topic of our next conversation. I'll close out the first five by saying this. There is more than I can possibly articulate in every show from now until Election Day, more at stake in this election than most people understand. Because what happened, this whole erasure of common concepts of justice, common understanding of the role of police, common understanding about civil law, civil society, common understanding about what we allow mobsters, protesters, violent criminals to do in our cities, all of that is on the table. Because the left is okay with what's happening. They have either become as enraged as these protesters and actually thinking that America deserves this onslaught, this horrific attack that is occurring in our cities around this country. They either think it's okay, or they're afraid to speak up and say, hey, we got to stop this. We really can't let Marxists and Black Lives Matter and the radical left in this country destroy civil society. They can't say it because they need their votes. So close out again the first five by saying this. We're going to talk about this. How far, what is it that peaceful, law-abiding America can do to stand up against the onslaught of what we're watching happen in our cities? Because the answer given by the conservative, pro-America, pro-patriot, pro-preservation of America's goodness side, the answer they offer is very different from the answers offered by the American left, which are pretty much going to say, you're going to shut up and take it. At the end of the day, you're going to let the protesters have whatever they want. That is your answer from the American left. Give in to everything they demand, whatever it is they want, and that's how we'll get to peace. America, and for the same reason we don't negotiate with terrorists in interactions around the world, we need to stop thinking that there's any basis to negotiate with Black Lives Matter, Antifa, or any other violent, anti-American, fascist, Marxist organization. We do not negotiate with them. We crush them. And that, my very fine friends, is today's First Five.